Hello, can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
All right. Very quickly, have you done any of these mocks before? Otherwise, I'll give you a quick rundown of how this goes.
I have, yes, I've done a couple of them. Yep.
All right, that's cool. Then I'll spend most of my time asking questions like I
Okay.
would to a real Facebook candidate. I'll keep a few minutes at the end for feedback. If I ask you a question you've already practiced before, let me know and I'll switch over to something totally different so that you can get the most out of this experience.
Okay.
And since we're doing this virtually, wherever possible, I'd encourage you to think out loud so that I can get a sense of where you're going
Of
and then we
course.
can course correct in the direction we need. All right. Before I begin, is there a particular type of question you'd like me to focus on, like sense or execution or leadership style?
I think product sense.
Product sense. And I did get job description link, but for some reason when I opened it, it wasn't loading. So maybe you can just tell me what if there's anything
Oh.
special to know from there.
I'm actually interviewing for a hardware position.
All
So
right.
it's consumer hardware having to do with audio for AR and VR.
All right.
And that certainly doesn't. I don't want you to limit the question you might ask based off of that. I'm certainly comfortable talking software or hardware.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think we can mix it up a little bit then, and
Sure.
maybe let's see how it goes. If you face the question before, let me know. I'll switch over to something else.
Sounds good.
All right. Cool. So let's say you've been asked in Facebook to come up with a redesign of a television remote. How do you approach this problem?
Okay, interesting. Let me ask some clarifying questions first. When I'm asked to redesign a TV remote, is this meant to be a universal remote or just specifically for a television? Am I able to define that? Would you prefer I define that?
Yeah, I'll leave that up to you.
Okay, I'm just taking some notes here. Now, when you say redesign, what am I sort of redesigning for? What am I trying to optimize? Or are you also okay with me defining that?
So let's say we feel that the current version of the remote was invented in the past when
Uh,
technology wasn't up to where it is right now. And we think there's so much more we could do with that remote.
sure.
What this could be, I leave up to you.
Okay. So essentially optimizing to bring up to date. So from there, let me outline how I would generally go about this problem. Actually, I do have one more question. Any sort of metric you'd like to prioritize or sort of business requirement you'd like me to prioritize, or should I define that as well?
Now, that is indeed a good question. Let's just say that if we do our jobs well, we would be expecting a lot more people to replace their TV remotes or whatever remotes you decide as your scope with
Okay.
whatever we design.
Okay.
So adoption is what I would go for.
Okay. What I will generally do with this type of problem is start off with a product vision. Talk a little bit about what we're trying to do with this product. I know we've had a little bit of discussion about that just now, but make sure we have one or two sentences that define for all of the teams, whether it's product, engineering, marketing, exactly what we're trying to do with this product and what we want this product to be. From there, I'll get into some specifics about metrics, and I think it's important at the top, and this sort of feeds into the product vision as well, but I think it's important to pick a North Star metric from there so we know sort of what we're starting with or where we are starting, where we are trying to go with this product from a vision standpoint and from a business metric standpoint or a product health standpoint. From there, I'll get into customer segmentation, probably talk about a few different types of users, pain points of those users. We'll talk a little bit about solutions to those pain points. And then towards the end, we'll talk about MVP. And since this is a hardware product, generally would talk about ID, CMF, mechanical design, so on and so forth. And then we can, at the very end, maybe
Yeah.
go back to our North Star metric and product vision and make sure we are on the same page. Does that make sense? Does that sound good?
Yes, that
Okay.
sounds very comprehensive. Let's start from the top then, the vision. Yeah.
Cool. So we're trying to create a TV remote that really is the TV remote of the future, right? So we are trying to
Yeah.
implement TV remote of the future, implementing enhanced technology to really enhance, or I should say advanced technology to enhance the user experience.
Right.
I think part of that is not just controlling television, but using a singular hardware device to control all types of smart technology in your home. And the TV is sort of a subset of that. So I think what we're trying to do from a product vision standpoint is really create the hardware remote control of the future. And we'll stick with that as sort of our product vision. So that's sort of our stake in the ground that we can come back to with our design challenges and our solutions. Now, when we talk about metrics, I generally, from a hardware perspective, stick to business metrics. Hardware is a little bit more fiscally risky than doing software, and there's a little bit more of a responsibility to be had on the product manager side to make sure that it is healthy and it is a smart decision, not just strategically but financially as well. So
can you elaborate on that a little bit before we go into the metrics? Like, can you help articulate why you feel hardware is generally a more risky proposition?
Yeah, you're generally amortizing tooling. You're paying for inventory in addition to sort of paying the human resources that are responsible for creating the product. So with software, it's generally not as costly a solution because you're not actually investing money in tooling, in actual parts that are being created and built and inventoried. You're not spending as much money in terms of logistics and getting product to your customers. So we can look at sort of customer metrics, adoption, engagement, retention, those types of things. But I'd rather leave those to the software product managers to discuss and keep the sort of hardware side of this as more business centric or more financially centric. Does that make sense?
All right, sure. Let's go this route. Okay. So what would these metrics look like?
Well, obviously there's the first metric really is units sold. And track that metric, I would say, over the first 60 to 90 days. This does a good job of showing us adoption and gives us a sort of a rough calc of customer scope. So if we're trying to prioritize customer scope outside of a business metric, this would give us a pretty rough idea of how many users or how many customers are actually engaging with this remote control. Now, this metric doesn't really account for pricing in the market. I always like to say that there's no such thing as a bad product, just a bad price. So if we get this thing out of the gate and the market segment or the market need has shifted, we might need to be slashing prices on it just to get it out of the warehouse. So units sold could be a massive number, but it doesn't really track for ROI in terms of money in our pocket. So that's where sort of the net sales metric comes in as our next metric to review. Again, something you can take a look at over 60 to 90 days, and then growth in your net sales probably every month thereafter. And I actually say 60 to 90 days because there is some discovery that needs to happen from a customer standpoint. So I don't necessarily like to track just from the first 30 days out. I like to give the first metric some time to sort of grow and mature before we get into tracking month to month. But net sales, I think, is a good one because it can do a rough estimate of your units sold. If, in some vacuum, that's the only metric you can track, you can then calc units sold based off that. And in any situation, it's giving you an underestimate of your user scope. You're generally, if you're selling one remote control, you can say this is for one user when traditionally that's not the case, right? It's for 2, 3, maybe 4 users.
Yep.
This net sales also accounts for price variability and promotions, so you're getting a better tracking of your return on investment with that. Next up, I usually look at profitability, GM1 percentage, which obviously, again, over 60 to 90 days, really ensures efficiency of sort of your supply chain and your design. Certainly accounts for pricing variability. If you're slashing prices on the product, you're going to take a hit at GM1, but it certainly doesn't account for units sold or net sales, and it's sort of market dependent, right? You need to really track pricing compared to everyone else you're up against. So I don't love to go up against GM1 or use that as a North Star metric, I should say. I also, sort of in the same vein, market share percentage is an important one to track, but certainly not a North Star. I think it is a good measure of overall success against the market, but it's not really product specific, and it certainly doesn't track for ROI. And then lastly,
Yep.
I usually like to track for mean time between failures. And this is really a long-term hardware metric. Generally, I will track this starting with the warranty period. So if it's 6 months or 1 year, just looking at the amount of time that our hardware product is staying viable in the market and is usable in the market. Certainly a better view of sort of the quality of product and the cost of the service per customer or per product that's put into the market.
Yep.
It's a good gauge of customer service, but again, it doesn't give you, or I should say it's a good gauge of customer experience, but it doesn't give you really feedback on ROI. So that's where
All right.
I do go back to net sales, and it sounds very, very capitalist and ruthless, but I think net sales, if we're going to pick one North Star metric, I think net sales really gives us the best tracking of our ROI, obviously. It accounts for any sort of market turbulence or any sort of pricing turbulence. And it does give us a pretty good idea of customer scope, at least an underestimate, which I think is much better than an overestimate. So I'd like to use net sales as our North Star metric, and obviously I think I would set a monthly net sales figure that would be our target, not knowing off the top of my head the size of the third-party TV remote market. I'm not sure what to put that at, but yes, obviously it would be a sort of a monthly metric that I would look towards. From our product vision, we're looking to build the remote control of the future, and our metric is net sales.
So using net sales as a North Star clearly comes with some risks associated where there might be some things you're missing. What would some of these things be? And just like you said, you'd also track profitability, GM1% market share, mean time between failures. Yeah. I'm curious to know what other things might be that you track in addition to these to ameliorate the risks of using net sales purely as the North Star.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I would track GM1 percentage because, again, our net sales could be through the roof, but if we are slashing prices on all of these, then we are certainly not achieving the profitability that we would want to achieve. And frankly, I think this tracking your GM1 ensures that there's no scope creep throughout the design of the development of the product. I think it ensures the sort of health of the product value proposition, so you're not having to again cut prices to be competitive. And then I would also track mean time between failures as well, because I think while we are looking at sort of a net sales and profitability metric, I think it's also important to track the overall quality of the product you're putting out into the market, because that has two illustrations that net sales certainly does not have, and that's how comfortable is my customer, or how satisfied is my customer with my product, and what is the overall cost of me putting this thing out into the market. If I'm employing customer service and I'm employing, or I'm utilizing warranty returns, or my warranty return rates are very high, those are sort of hidden costs that aren't really accounted for in net sales or in GM1.
All right. Is there anything else you'd also choose to look at, or would you pause in your metrics tracking with what you've already listed out?
Well, I think, again, market share, we talked about sort of overall success against market. That is certainly less product specific, although if we are making a single remote, then it's a good way of tracking that. So I think that would be a last priority, but I think units sold also does give a better idea of sort of customer scope, even though it doesn't really track for ROI. So we might throw that in towards the end. But I think from a prioritization standpoint, obviously net sales is number one, GM1 is number two. I would say mean time between failures is 3, and units sold would be 4 for me.
All right, thanks. Let's move on, get back on track to what you were talking about. So we've identified our goal, the vision, the metric. What are we going to do next?
Let's do customer segments. And I think that there are a few different customer segments here, and I apologize if this takes me a little longer to think about
That's
than
fine. That's
most,
totally
but
okay.
I sort of see two main customer segments here, and it's sort of based on tech fluency. Just off the top of my head, I'm seeing this as your sort of novice customer segment, someone that's just using this remote for TV and
Mhm.
maybe, other video devices. So they're using it to control a streaming player, or, switching inputs on the TV, or maybe they're using some sort of AVR. They're using it to control a singular media experience. And again, switching inputs on the TV to maybe a Blu-ray player or a streaming system. So that's sort of your entry level smart remote user, or user for the remote of the future. And then I see a second product segment of someone who has smart lighting in their home. They have a whole home music system, whether it's Sonos or something similar, and using this remote control to control all of it, whether it's an alarm system, something like that. So they're really using this as a full control system over everything in their home. Certainly there's some in between there, somebody that's using it for primarily TV use, but might have a whole home music system and they'll use it for that. But I see these sort of two primary customer segments.
All right.
The sort of TV only user really has more options now, certainly now with HDMI CEC allowing one remote to sort of control all of these devices that are connected to HDMI. So I think our best growth opportunity is for this whole home control system and the customer that is using this remote control for a whole home control.
All right. Can you help elaborate a little better on why this is a better target to focus on?
Yeah. So really what I'm seeing with this remote is the capability to connect not just as an IR remote control or an RF remote control, but a full Wi-Fi remote. We talked about using enhanced technology to ensure that this is the remote of the future. So I think coming to market with a universal remote that's only IR, or even only IR or RF, is really just not a smart solution in terms of future-proofing your product. So from a price point, I think this is probably going to put us in the, just roughly off the top of my head, into maybe the $149 to $199 price point. I know there's a lot of competition in that range and above in the sort of whole home remote control. But I'm trying to make something that's a little easier to use, but still suitable for that whole home customer. So I want to stick with them because I think they're probably a little bit more open to a larger budget for a remote control than someone that's just trying to figure out how to use their TV without using a TV remote and a streaming player remote or Apple TV remote, something like that. So let's stick with this whole home customer, or sort of we'll call them the pro user. They know how to use all of these and what kinds of pain points they might have. I think starting off, it's pretty obvious, right? It's controlling too many devices or controlling a lot of devices. Another pain point might be a lot of different devices use different control technologies. One might be Wi-Fi, one might be IR, like we sort of discussed briefly, versus RF. Different types of media, I think, is a pain point, and controlling all these different types of media and essentially putting them all together and making sure they're working intermittently. I think ease of use is a big one as well. We mentioned these might be pro users, but a lot of times these pro users are generally head of household, and the spouse or the kids don't know how to use the system, and a lot of times that causes more trouble than it's worth. So making it something that's as easy to use as possible, I think, is important. So I don't necessarily want to prioritize these pain points because I think they can all the solutions are sort of complementary to all of them. But if I had to do one, I think when I go back and think of our product vision as the remote of the future, The
Yep.
remote of the future is not going to be necessarily more difficult to use than the remote of present day, or it really shouldn't be. So I think ease of use is our first pain point that we want to prioritize.
Hmm.
I think the sort of IR versus Wi-Fi versus RF and controlling all these different devices,
Mm-hmm.
those are technological questions that really should be left to the engineering teams. You know, as a product manager, we can spec them out,
All
but I
right.
think there's a greater discussion there that needs to happen with engineering to determine how all these different devices can be controlled, and if there are ways to ensure they're being controlled appropriately without trying to cram too much in terms of a UI into this.
Yeah. All
And
right.
then of course, types of media. Obviously, that sort of falls into that bucket as well with controlling all these different devices. But I think controlling these types of media is a close second in terms of prioritization, and also sort of falls into ease of use. But the idea of creating scenes or creating routines to control all of these different, you know, if I want to watch TV, it can turn on my TV and send that audio to a soundbar or send it to my whole home audio system. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
important.
All right. Understood. So we've identified several pain points. We've narrowed down which ones we think are worth solving. What are you going to do next now that you have
So
this idea in your head?
yeah, let's go into sort of what this thing looks like and
Yes.
how the overall design of it, the industrial design, can help us with these sort of solutions.
Yep.
So from a design standpoint, obviously the pain points for design are this thing needs to be relatively handheld, and we can sort of play into the look and feel of a cell phone, but does that limit our UI possibilities? Maybe it does. If we expand this thing out to the size of a tablet, does that just, you know, cause more problems than we're solving? Possibly it does. I think this is there would need to be some research, some UI research done on this,
All
but
right.
maybe some work with the industrial design team on exactly the perfect sort of handheld size for this thing. But we want it to be inviting. We want it to be
Mm-hmm.
easy to use. So something that is sort of a handheld size. I'm seeing a fully touch screen, if this is truly the remote of the future, a fully touch screen UI with
Yep.
fairly large icons that can be somewhat user programmable.
Yep.
And I can say, you know, I want to only control my music or control only my TV. And maybe it does just come down to audio, video, lighting, and security. And those are sort of my four icons on the home screen. And I pick one, and then it gives me more in-depth control over those.
All
I
right.
think from a UI standpoint, people are more visual than they are open to sort of reading text. So instead
Yep.
of having, you know, bedroom TV, media room TV, maybe this UI is able to do sort of a rough map of my house and can use, you know, Bluetooth BLE to sort of location map where some of these other electronics are. So it knows where I am in the house, and it knows relative to my location what I might want to control. So it's able to
Yep.
prioritize some of those for me.
All right. So just if you had to hypothesize what some of the other use cases might look like, in addition to the ones you've already listed out, like the TV, the soundbar, the smart lights, what
Yeah.
would some of the other components potentially be?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned home security system. I
Yep.
think which you
Mm-hmm.
know, the DIY home security
Yep.
is really a booming business. So being able to integrate that and really
Mm-hmm.
use this remote control to control that, you know, punch in my security code when I get home on this
Mm-hmm.
remote. So maybe there is some sort of wall mounting solution so I can keep this thing close to the door,
Yep.
or some sort of remote or companion app that I can use with it so I can turn my security system off before I even get home. Or it recognizes my location. Obviously, this is more of a specific security system, but it uses this location tracking to make sure, you know, I'm the person that's home. When I walk up to the front door, it automatically unlocks it and turns my alarm off.
Yep.
It's
Understood.
certainly a wider product vision or a wider scope than than we were talking about with a TV remote.
Sure, but that's fine. That's totally okay. Let's look beyond security as well. Can you think of other similar, or not similar, sorry, other use cases where this might
Yeah.
also work out?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a large business for smart thermostats and
Yeah.
being able
All
to
right.
do climate control in my house and in maybe 2 or 3 different zones in my house would be important.
Yeah.
Obviously, we talked about TV audio, but the idea of whole home audio, if I want to play music throughout my house or if I
Yeah.
have speakers set up outside, being able to control that. And again, doing that from sort of a mapping or a simulated map of my home where I can control visually what music is playing where instead of trying to read through somewhat homogeneous icons.
Hmm.
So whole home audio, I think, is an important one. There are people with automated fireplaces. So maybe there's a scene
Yeah.
or a routine that I can create that the lights go down and the fireplace turns on,
Hmm.
for romantic date night or what have you. So I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of integration here, getting
Yeah.
away from just a TV remote and getting into really the remote of the future, like we talked about.
All right. Yes. Cool. Sorry for taking you down that tangent. Let's get back to you were telling me about how you could automatically detect using Bluetooth and BLE what devices are out there, and that's great. What else do we have?
Yeah, I think obviously this thing, maybe it is so obvious that it doesn't need to be said, but I think this is a battery powered tablet, so I can, put it on some sort of charging station to make sure it gets power, but I don't have to worry about it being stationary or, it being plugged in all the time. So that sort of goes without saying nowadays, especially for the remote of the future. But yeah, I think from a touch standpoint, it should be fairly light, fairly thin and small, but should have enough of a screen on it so I can very easily access the features that I need without digging in too deep on a menu.
Yeah. All right. Understood what that vision looks like. Let's talk about you've got a long list of possible components or features. If you had to pick the one that you'd start out with in your MVP, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think the MVP would be a television remote and a full home audio remote with maybe some works with Google or works with Alexa control so I can control my smart thermostat or control, my alarm system as part of that ecosystem.
All right. So that was actually going to be a question I wanted to ask you. So how would you position this against the technologies that already exist for, say, home smart device coordination like Alexa or Home?
Yeah, very, very good question. So I think obviously there are, big players in this space. Smart home connectivity, like I said,
Yep.
works with Google Assistant, works with Alexa,
Mhm.
Apple HomeKit. But these are
Yep.
all sort of software or app-based technologies or
Yep.
user interfaces. And I think that's where this really has a great value prop is that if we can create a hardware remote that
Mhm.
is easy to use and as powerful as Google Assistant and Alexa, then I think that can go a long way in increasing net sales and increasing that user scope. Um, I think there's a convenience story with
Mhm.
all of these different services, but some of it is kind of lost on the sort of later middle-aged baby boomer crowd because they're afraid of voice activation.
Yep.
They're afraid of sort of app control. And if we can create a hardware remote, which they're used to going to control media in their home, then I think that's an important value proposition.
All right. So just so that I make sure I'm getting this clearly, your recommendation would be to position this as an alternative to the devices that are already out there.
Correct. And I think it's not just an alternative to it, but I think it's an add-on. Again,
Yep.
We can integrate, Google Assistant or works with Alexa pretty easily and give a customer a hardware device that makes the control of that system much easier than, downloading an app and trying to figure out these apps that are generally multi-purpose, trying to
Mhm.
sort out, what my routines are, what I'm able to control and where is it.
Yep.
Again, creating sort of a visual mapping of the area, I think would go a long way.
Yep. So if I had to ask you within your, say, go-to-market, would you prefer to position this as a competitor that stands alone or as an add-on that goes with one of the existing solutions out there, what would you choose and why?
I think we position it as a competitor that stands alone, but give the capability, and maybe maybe the Alexa and Google Assistant works with technology is not an MVP feature.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think we align it as a competitor because that gives us a little bit more freedom to talk about core value proposition of this. This is a hardware device that allows you to, whether it's IR, RF, or Wi-Fi, any of these devices that are controlled with any of those technologies can be controlled with this device. You don't necessarily have to have works with Alexa or works with Google Assistant devices for it to work.
All right. Let's talk very quickly about some of the software metrics you'd also track. So let's say you've gotten your team resourced for this, you've built the basic stuff out, and you've just begun launching it into the market, and you basically being asked for advice on what are some of the software metrics that you want to track to, say, guarantee success. What would these be?
Good question. I would start off by tracking engagement. How often is a user logging in to this device, and how often are they using it for, and this would be probably a weekly metric, right? Because people's media consumption habits change, I think, from day to day throughout the week.
Yep.
Maybe Saturdays and Sundays are more media consumption heavy than Mondays through Fridays, although now with work from home, maybe that's not the case. But
fair enough.
I would track engagement.
Yep.
I would certainly track sort of retention. So, let me go back to engagement first. Obviously, the number of uses or number of times this is used to turn on a TV is important, right?
Yep.
Obviously, there's some risk there because maybe someone doesn't have a TV and they're just using this for security. They're just using this for a thermostat.
Yep.
Sort of along the same lines, you can also track variety of actions. So are they using it to turn on the TV? Are they using it to control the thermostat? Are they using it to control their security system or their music system? But again, there's some variability there by customer. So I think what's important really, and what I'd like to prioritize is the retention metric of how many times is somebody using this, or for everyone that uses this for a specific action, what percentage of those people are using it for that action the following week? And I think there's some metrics there on the retention side where you can say, again, this might be a risky assumption, but you can say, how many times is someone using this to turn on their TV one week, but then the next week they're using it to turn on their TV and adjust their thermostat or adjust their security system? And I think there's a retention but also adoption metric there, because maybe this is causing someone to really buy into this ecosystem and become more tech savvy or more tech forward. So I think retention, while again it is a little bit risky because it is fairly customer specific, I think it's a good metric for usability and sort of the ease of use pain point that we talked about earlier in the discussion.
All right. Is there anything else that you would also track?
Obviously, long term, we're going to want to track sort of adoption and make sure those numbers are going up.
Yep.
As the user base gets more tech savvy, and as we get further and further into the future, there will be other pieces of hardware, other products on the market that can probably solve the same solution. So it's a matter of continuing to sort of grind out our gap analysis and our competitive analysis to make sure that our feature set is viable long term.
All right. And within all the software metrics that you've outlined right now, if you had to pick a North Star within those or the primary metric you track, which one of these would that likely be?
Yeah, I think I would track engagement, and I wouldn't limit it to a specific type of control or a specific action, but just the number of actions per week. And I'd like to see that going up, obviously, week to week, because I think that speaks to usability of the device, but also frankly, the number of users and number of devices that are in the field.
All right. Cool. Just a couple of one or two more quick questions. So let's say you're preparing your launch plan for this product and there's this slide that you have to fill out for legal saying what are the risks that we are taking and how are we mitigating these risks. What would you fill into this slide?
So I think there's a partnership or a technology risk, right? Whether working with Alexa, Google Assistant, any of these sort of larger third-party control technologies, there's certainly certifications and some
Yep.
legal risk there. Obviously, there's a big privacy component as well, especially if we're talking about mapping out somewhat visually, even a basic visualization of someone's living space
Mm-hmm.
and using their data track these metrics. So that's the privacy is the biggest one from a user risk standpoint and probably from a legal risk, but I'm always trying to be cognizant of these sort of business
Mm-hmm.
partnerships and technological partnerships as well.
All right. And if you had to articulate how you'd go around mitigating these risks, what would your response be?
Yeah, I think there's a certainly limited access to the data, particularly the location mapping from a software architect or software engineer standpoint. So maybe that data doesn't leave the device somehow, or it's encrypted before it gets to anyone that would be maybe working on that side. And then obviously just very frank and very plain privacy agreements in the device itself. So before, maybe the location mapping or the visualization of your home is an added feature that you can decline
Yeah.
by not saying yes to this privacy policy.
All right. Got it. Thanks for sharing that. Just the last question from me. You've explained this product to your manager and he really likes the idea and now he wants you to put together a quick presentation for Facebook
Okay.
leadership to explain why we should be doing this. All right.
Okay.
What would be your, say, 3 or 4 sentence pitch? What are the topics you would cover in there? And maybe give it a minute, think about it, and then try delivering the pitch right now. And let's see how that goes.
Okay. Let me think about this and jot down some ideas.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Got some ideas. So really, if I'm pitching a Facebook product to Facebook leadership, I want to start with the Facebook mission. And the Facebook mission always is connecting the world. And, Facebook has 2 billion users at this point, and they have the most data out of any really social media or tech company in the world. And utilizing that towards, or I should say, utilizing that mission of connecting the world, why aren't we connecting more easily these users with all of the technologies in their lives? We've talked a little bit about Portal, and Portal is a big bet for Facebook, and I think it's important to kind of keep that aligned with the Facebook mission. And using a hardware remote, again, for sort of the baby boomer plus or middle age plus, maybe this allows them sort of an easier UI to connect with friends and family via that Portal technology. So it certainly falls in line with the Facebook mission of connecting people, not just connecting people to their technology, but connecting people to each other. And I think there's a play there for this as well. That's all I've got, actually. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's totally okay. So what you've just articulated to me is the driver of how this particular product connects to the Facebook mission, and that's great. Let's say you have to summarize the conversation we've had. We've discussed a whole lot of topics throughout the entire product development life cycle, and you have to abstract some of the key takeaways from that for leadership in, say, a way they would understand. What would be some of the elements that you'd pick from that? And let's choose those as well and add them onto the pitch you've already made for how this ties in to the mission.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. So Facebook is all about making, we've talked about sort of connecting people, but part of that mission is making these connections personable and natural. We talk about sort of the VR and AR research and development they've been doing, and I think this sort of falls into that as well. And we talked about making the remote of the future. The remote of the future is going to be a remote that can control all of these different tech devices seamlessly, intuitively, and in a way that feels natural and feels like an extension of yourself. So
Cool.
by integrating, ease of use, all of these different types of media that people have in their homes nowadays, I think is really important
All right.
in making the integration of this technology as natural as it can be.
All right, cool. Thanks for sharing that. What I'm going to do now is pause the interview and maybe spend the next few minutes giving you feedback. I'll give you some high level feedback to begin with, and then we'll go section by section through
Okay,
all that we discussed, and then I can go a little more granular in there.
great.
All right. So overall, at a high level, in terms of the positive stuff, man, I think your expertise in the hardware space really shines through, and well done on that front, because
Okay.
I think especially when we were discussing some of the underlying technologies and the things we'd look at, in fact, I recommend that when you speak about those things, you allude to your experience. Say that in my experience, I have noticed that these
Okay.
metrics tend to matter more, because then that just reinforces that you really, really know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Although I thought you did that well pretty much all throughout, so well done on that front. I also thought you had a very good structure, and the fact that you flagged upfront the topics you were going to cover made it particularly easy for me, and like I'm guessing in your interview, it'll be your actual interviewer to follow what you're going to do.
Okay.
You frequently checked in with where you were in the process as well, which again made it easy for me to track. But it also, for a lot of interviewers, they want to drill down into a particular topic, like especially because they might have received feedback from your first round, or I don't know which round you're at right now, but
Yeah, I'm
interviewers
at.
will pass notes between them. Sorry,
Okay.
yes, go on.
No, I was just going to say I'm at first round. Haven't done
Okay.
anything yet.
All right, got it. So, but after this, then your feedback will transition to the next round, and they will often drill down on whatever they've noticed is things you might be potentially weak on. So you might have an entire interview dedicated just to like sizing the opportunity and figuring out what the metrics should be and how you'd set goals, because that's what they might have felt you were weak on. So the signposting up front was a smart tactic, and referencing it throughout the interview was well done. The only part I thought was slightly risky is actually two things. A, the fact that you chose to define the metrics upfront.
Okay.
I'd say it's largely a risky strategy, because sometimes in your customer segmentation, you might end up picking a customer segment which will need metrics defined for that segment or for the pain point that you pick in there. So while defining a North Star upfront is generally a good idea, I'd also advise you to flag alongside that depending on the solution I build, I will add more metrics further down the line, so that your interviewer knows that you're going to nuance those metrics finally to the solution that you end up designing.
Okay.
Because at the start of the interview, you don't necessarily know that. The second thing I think you did, it was a risky bet, and I'm just flagging it out as constructive more in terms of something to prepare for, is
Sure.
that you increase the scope of this question from a TV remote to all, like a remote which would connect everything, and I was perfectly happy to explore that. Some interviewers might force you back into, no, but let's just talk about the television experience.
Okay.
So it's something to watch out for. It's not constructive within this interview. It's just something to be prepared for in an actual interview.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go section by section now, and just a minute on each to see how we went in. So we started off with the vision. I thought you defined it well. I thought what I particularly liked was that you had a one-liner that say would be memorable at the end of the interview, which you could keep referencing back to, that you want to create the hardware remote control of the future, and you made it abstract enough to cover any kind of smart home product, which was good. And that's kind of the big picture thinking that Facebook likes as well. So
Okay.
the fact that you checked in with me and said that's what I'd like to do was well done. So good job on that front.
Great.
When it came to the customer segmentation, I thought you picked two good customer segments, the novice versus say the power user or the advanced user. I'd say though, when it came to picking which segment, you picked the one where you had already defined a product vision for. So your rationale for prioritizing that was slightly weak, and it hinged upon the fact that, hey, all these technologies exist, so we might as well be using them. It might be worth fleshing out either the scenario a little bit that, like, if we don't do it, somebody else will, and folks like Alexa in Echo and Google Home, Google Assistant, these are devices that are making huge headway that will create a competitive disadvantage for us if we don't try to enter. but also the fact that it is the future. Like, devices are currently very, very disparate and need to be connected. People need to put in lots of extra effort. There's just fleshing out the persona or the problem a little bit for these people you've prioritized to explain what the impact will actually be and use that to justify, because it's very easy for your interviewer otherwise to say that, hey, you're talking about power users, they're probably what, 5% of our entire possible segment.
Yeah.
They should be the last people we should be concentrating on.
Sure.
So it's something to proactively defend against.
Okay.
All right. Likewise, you might well have great product ideas for the novice user segment as well, because if you think about it, those are the ones who are actually struggling with doing anything at all. So building a product for them might actually be a strategic bet that would lead to many more returns. So something to be careful of. We didn't dig too deep into it, but it's something that could get picked up. In terms of the metrics you picked, there's one risk, generally speaking, with using net sales. Most interviewers won't question you on this, but some who have that experience might. But net sales tends to be a lagging indicator. So you need to, like, you know the concept. And that's something to flag out as a risk. So for instance, when I asked what happens, what else would you track to mitigate this risk, I thought you came out with some really good metrics. And I think there as well, your experience shone through, because you very quickly narrowed down on, hey, I'm focusing on the hardware here. Ultimately, what's going to matter is the business metrics. Mm-hmm. Just something to make that a little more robust, I'd say, to avoid or to mitigate the fact that net sales will be lagging. And you kind of hinted at this by mentioning mean time between failures, but even that is to some extent lagging, is to look at something between the point of sale and the point of revenue. I'd say something like, what are the average reviews we're getting? What is the kind of PR coverage we're getting? Or what are power users actually saying? Or how many customer support tickets are we getting? These might not be failure metrics, but they might be how many Google searches are happening for how to use the Facebook TV remote. Or a topic like this, how much is it trending, might give you some early signals on what human responses are to the new product you've deployed. Again, this is something that could have come up at the later stage of the interview when I asked you what the software metrics are as well, because these are kind of outside the ecosystem of hardware and software, and they're more about how does it fit into the entire marketplace.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. Overall, when it came, I'm jumping back to the customer segments. I missed the metrics part up front, so I jumped between them. There's a possible pure constructive, just something to think about. I did not fault you for this at all, but the idea just popped into my head when you were explaining novice customers. There might be a third segment, which could be people who tend to use things like TVs a lot, but aren't very familiar with how to use it constructively or productively, or aren't able to. So people like kids, for instance, or the elderly who might have special requirements to factor in, but where there's no product in the market that is nuanced to their use case, could be another possible customer segment to explore. But as I mentioned, not faulting you for this at all. This just popped into my head, so I wanted to mention it in case a similar question comes up.
Okay.
Where else? Then we moved into the pain points. I thought you did a great job there. Again, like mentioning different technologies out there, Wi-Fi, infrared, radio, too many devices, ease of use. I thought this section was pretty well done. One of my favorite parts of the interview was actually what the experience would look like, because I think that's where you made it very clear that you know what you're talking about in terms of a hardware. You jumped straight into topics like it needs to be handheld, what the look and feel could be like. And I thought the fact that you proactively contributed what the disadvantages would be really helped build your case for you, because these are questions I would have asked otherwise. And that, what do you think some of the problems with say a cell phone look and feel could be? You contributed that proactively. I did want to stretch you a little bit to move, since you yourself had set the scope out to be more than just TV and audio video. I wanted to see how you could think along the creative dimension of what other products could also tie in. And I thought you did that well. And you talked about thermostats, smart fireplaces, romantic date night. And I thought the idea of creating a map to automatically detect things was both creative and could also be articulated as part of your vision. So this is a smart remote, and it's fine, by the way, to evolve your vision as you go along the interview, because you are discovering new things with your interviewer. So it's perfectly easy, okay, to say that, okay, so if my 3-year vision is I want a smart remote that can control everything, my 5-year vision might be a smart remote which you bring into your house and it does everything for you. It sets things up, it detects where everything is, And that's the dream that I try to optimize towards over the 5-year period.
Right.
So well done on the explanation of what the design experience would look like. I thought you did well in explaining what the MVP feature might look like. Yes, so we discussed a little bit how you'd position this. And I got slightly confused here, but I think you cleared it up later because I very deliberately asked you, so would you rather position this as a competitor or would you position this as a standalone? And your initial response was, I'd be happy to do both, and maybe I do the latter, bundling it or positioning it alongside as something not within the MVP. So when an interviewer is asking you to do one of the others, it's generally just like I'm asking you to pick between them and maybe establish the pros and cons of these, and you did do this as a next step. So I'm again not faulting you for it. But it's worth thinking a little bit in your actual interview about a few more arguments of why it would be better. I thought the one you had was good in that we would position the hardware aspect as the unique selling proposition here. I thought what you gave as part of your final pitch for leadership was something that could also contribute here, in that this is going to be your hardware device that connects you to not just people, it connects you to your house, because it connects you to everything that could potentially have a smart aspect to it. So none of that extra work that you need to do to integrate something with Alexa, to onboard it to the Wi-Fi, to figure out how to upgrade your infrared communication to Wi-Fi and so on would need to be done, because this automates your home for you. So that could be part of the reason why you'd want to pitch this as a standalone. Just to caveat here, an equally legitimate answer could be that no, my initial MVP would be to bundle it, because then we could leverage the marketing resources and blah, blah, blah as well. So there's no right answer here. It's just about how you justify what you're going with. Finally, when it comes to software metrics, I thought they were pretty good. You identified all the important ones. They did seem a little like, I think you were mentioning them on the fly as they came up to you. There's a framework that I tend to use for this, which helps me structure this in my answers, especially when you have a North Star in mind. It's okay not to have it, but generally speaking, for software metrics, I tend to look at from the user's perspective, engagement-wise, there's breadth, there's depth, there's value, and there's retention. Right. And breadth is the number of things they use within the product. So this could be the number of products they integrate with that TV remote, or it could be the number of users who are using that TV remote. Depth could be how often they use it. So are they using it day on day? Are they using it, say, just for one device that they've integrated, or are they using it for a plethora of devices? Retention is how frequently they buy the product. That wouldn't be a good one in this case, because they're not going to buy a TV remote every week. So here retention would be exactly what you defined as, are they using it week on week? And I thought that was a well explained nuance, because that is one of the risks, right? They buy the remote or it's gifted to them, they integrate it, they use it twice, and then just go back to using the old TV remote because that's a familiar experience. Right. In that context, I think you hinted at this in your metrics, but it is best to call it out explicitly that for products like this, there will be a learning curve. So even your 30, 60, 90-day period might be fraught with risks, because you might have loads of people buying it out of the hype. Like Facebook's introduced a brand new TV remote or a brand new remote that's going to automate your house, and then it falls flat because they don't know what to do with it 1 week into using it, or they decide to go back to what they're familiar with. So tracking drop-offs like that is a much more subtle part of the user experience. Usually only experienced product managers manage to highlight during their interviews, and I think flagging that out just builds out your credibility. Risk section was well done. I thought you explained them very effectively. The privacy aspect, the partnerships aspect, well done there. When it comes to the pitch, basically that was a twisted way of me asking you to summarize the conversation. All right, so I thought you tied it to the Facebook mission really well. It wasn't easy to tie this rather random product I pulled out of nowhere into the Facebook mission, but I thought you did a good job of it. So it didn't come off as sounding forced, so well done on that. When it comes to the rest of the pitch, though, I would recommend thinking about, for a very long 1 hour conversation, a 45-minute conversation, how would you summarize it in 4-5 sentences? Yeah. So something along the lines of, I'm here to recommend investing into building what we consider is going to be the remote of the future. We think TV remotes offer a suboptimal experience because they don't use all the technologies out there, and they fundamentally miss out on all the opportunities that are present within the context of the home. We're going to position this. Our initial product is going to be just XYZ with this basic functionality. We might eventually also integrate with Home and Alexa and all the good stuff out there.
Yeah.
And we're primarily focusing on power users because those are who we think we should build our initial traction with, who can help us with go-to-market. There is, of course, a privacy risk to this, which we will mitigate proactively with legal. And that's your pitch that gives everything in a nutshell to leadership and covers in more to the, like from the interviewer's perspective, covers the highlights of the conversation and demonstrates your ability to pull out the key takeaways from each section we discussed, which is not easy, by the way. It's a very, very underrated skill and an understated one, but it does come up sometimes to see what can you distill from the conversation. All right. That's basically it. That's a load of feedback. I want to mention though, like if I was actually evaluating this interview, my recommendation would have been a leaning towards hire. So I'm going to wish you the best of luck with your session. Most of my feedback is on the nitpicky side, and it's like if you truly want to stand out, you can try fitting some of it in if the circumstance is relevant. But overall, I thought you did a good job.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please subscribe. Our website is prepfully.com. We've got lots of interview questions there. You can also schedule a mock interview with one of our experts. You can find the link in the description below. All the best from us at Prepfully, and we hope you totally rock your interview.